All right, so there's two types of auditing that we're going to be looking at. They are auditing of administrative configuration changes to the setup menu, and then application data auditing. So auditing in terms of what have your users been entering in terms of the data that they've been updating. All right, so let's talk about auditing configuration changes. So we have a facility whereby you can see what all of the sort of setup menu type changes that have occurred within your org. The name of the feature is called Setup Audit Trail, and Setup Audit Trail is available under the monitoring area. And it'll show you the last 20 configuration changes to your org. Now that is just what you would see within the web browser when you clicked on the link. But we also store the last 180 days in the database, and you can access that as a CSV file. So that's available for download if you want to go back as far as there, and then possibly, implement some sort of archiving schedule or something like that. Let's take a look at what this looks like within the tool. So over here under my setup menu, so under security controls is View Setup Audit Trail. And if we click on this, what it does is it tells me, so what, essentially what changes did I make to my organization. So here, created a time trigger. These are all the things that I was doing as part of my demos yesterday. It's also tracking when I was logging in as other people by clicking on the login link. Changing my processes, so I was doing a bunch of stuff there. Now, as I said, you can also download the CSV file to get the last 6 months to see, if someone left a month ago or something like that type of situation. Okay. Any questions about this? Pretty straightforward. Yeah.
So is that log anything that you do that's personal setup, app setup, anything in the setup, admin setup?
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily going to be personal setup, but anything that it's administrative by any user. So in my case, it's just me, but yeah, anything administrative. So the app setup and the administration setup. So yeah. All right. Okay, we'll come back to the lab exercise. Now, another thing that you can do is audit changes to application data. So, not administrative changes, but changes to candidate records or position records, all the different types of changes that occur to your records that users would be applying. Okay? So there's a feature called field history tracking, which enables us to do that. Now, what you do is in the setup of your object, you would identify what fields would you like to track. If you remember, when we created our objects, one of the things that we did was there was a checkbox in the wizard for defining our new object. And what that checkbox was track field history. Okay? So I'm going to churn track field history on, and in churning track field history on, what's going to happen is that now under custom fields and relationships, I'll be able to set tracking of field values. Okay. Now, when you're setting up field history tracking, it is not a sort of, it's not simply by, that checkbox that I just enabled, track field history, does not actually turn on the tracking of anything. It just enables the facility where I can now identify what I'd like to track. Okay? So now I can click on Set History Tracking. And what it does is it offers up this dialog box where it says track old and new values. And what I can do is I can come in here and check these boxes to identify that these are the fields that I'd like to track. So I could come in here and select a bunch of these. Okay. Now, what's going to happen is that the next time that a user goes out and makes a change to a particular record of that type, we will track the changes, and what there's going to be is there's going to be a related list associated with the history of that particular record. Okay. So in my case, tracking for field history tracking associated with candidates is already turned on, and so I see this related list now called candidate history. Okay. So in this case here, it's saying change the owner from admin user to Phil Katz. Okay. All right. So if I go back to my setup menu, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Objects, click on Candidate. I'm going to enable history tracking for an additional field. So I have some of these on by default. And then what I'll do is, why don't I, well, I've already got phone on. So let me go back to my candidate, make a change to the candidate's phone number. So, and click on Save. So there we go. And then down here, the most recent change made, change the phone number from 619-555 to 12345-678. Looks like I did 6 twice.
So this list will be 20, right?
What's that?
This list will be 20 limits, right?
No. What's going to happen, the limits in terms of the amount of field history tracking? No, I don't think that there's a limit in terms of the number of fields that you can track, but not a limit associated with the values that you're tracking. Let me verify that in my. Yeah. 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 The limit is applied to the number of fields that you would track per object. You can track up to 50, or I'm sorry, up to 20 fields per object. But there's not a limit associated with the sort of the historical data associated with the with what you're tracking.
It says up to 20 changes are displayed within the application. What is that?
Oh, then there's I think the list itself. Let's see if I have like something with a large number of changes made to it.
That 20 is not about the changes.
Yeah, it's the, I bet I have a lot of changes to Joe Schmo. Oh, I take that back.
20 is Salesforce magic number.
I guess you see a lot of it. I believe that's referring to the size of the list that would be displayed. But let me look that one up and just get the exact number for you. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. So there's actually 2 types of changes that we track, or there's 2 different types of fields that behave differently in terms of field history tracking. So things like your long text areas and your multi-select pick lists, what it does is it just identifies that a change was made, but it does not store the old value. So For something like a long text area, that can be up to 32,000 characters. So it just says, you know, a change was made to this particular thing on this date, as opposed to, you know, here's the giant piece of text before, and here's the giant piece of text after. So same thing for multi-select pick lists. Okay. Otherwise, other field types, it'll tell you, here's the old value, and then here's the new value. Okay. All right, so during the class, we've talked about a number of different types of auditing or logging. And so I just want to take a moment to compare all of these different things. So if you remember yesterday morning, we talked about debug logs. Debug logs were sort of, you know, runtime errors, runtime, not necessarily even errors particularly, it could just be something that completed successfully. But it's sort of runtime logging of the execution of your processes, workflow rules, database changes, whatever it may be. Primarily used for figuring out why something is broken or what's happening, you know, why is it happening the way, or a way different than I thought it would happen. So an example of using debug logs is something like your Apex trigger, your workflow rules are doing, you know, behaving poorly, and you want to figure out why. Field history tracking is for application data, being able to see the previous data, who set it and when. So primarily, who changed what, when did they do it, and what's the thing that they set it to. And then the setup audit trail is referring to our administration changes. So changes to the configuration of your org and being able to see, what did your administrators do? What was the changes? What were the changes that they made? Okay. So examples like that, change to a workflow rule, data type of a field. All right. Any questions about these three different types of logging which exist? Okay. All right, let's do this. Let's work on exercises 4-1, 4-2, and 4-3, and you'll have the opportunity to go in and make some changes and see the results. Okay. All right. I just want to mention a couple of things. There are reports that you can run on history for a particular object. And then the second thing I want to mention was that one of the things that exists within Salesforce is that there are limits on the amount of data, unstructured data and structured data within your org. Field history tracking does not count against either of those limits. Okay? All right, and if you want to go and see those limits can be found under the setup menu and under company information, which is in the company profile. You can see your used data space and your used file space. So those are the two structured and unstructured data. All right. Let's keep moving along here. All right, we have some sort of fun play along type of questions here. A little bit similar to what we did at the end of designing apps for multiple users. And so this is kind of which feature would you use within the tool or within Salesforce to meet these requirements. John, why don't we start with you, and then we'll just kind of move our way once again along the front row. So a developer at Universal Containers needs to make sure that the format of a contract number for contractors in temporary positions always follows the same format. The contract number should not be entered in the system if it does not follow the format. So what feature would we use, and then what specific, I don't want to give it away, but what thing, what function in that thing would we use?
It'd be a validation rule.
A validation rule. So
And, regex.
very good, very good. So in this case, we'd want to utilize a validation rule, and then the function that we would specifically use within that validation rule is regex. Sometimes contractors in temporary positions will stay in that position throughout the duration of multiple contracts. Universal Containers would like to track any changes to the contract number field. Which tool would that? Which tool we would use?
Set up field history.
That'd be field history tracking. Very good. Developer left Universal Containers, and auditors would like to understand the changes that person made to Salesforce before departing. Sounds very nefarious. Carol, what could we do?
View setup trails.
View audit, setup audit trail, yes. View setup audit trail under security controls. When new candidate records are created, Universal Containers tracks whether or not a visa is required. If a candidate requires a visa, Universal Containers would like to send an email to the recruiter to ensure that the proper procedures are followed. So Chris, which tool we use there?
Workflow.
Workflow rule, yeah, exactly. So we're going to utilize an email alert action or possibly a task in our workflow rule that is triggered whenever we save a record in which visa is required. Okay. If Universal Containers wanted to not only send an email if a candidate requires a visa, but also require approvals from the hiring manager and HR, which tool would you use?
Approval process.
Approval processes. We need to come up with a word other than approvals in there because that kind of gives it away. So approval process. All right, very good. Chris, we have a number of review questions that you get to do the first one for. So what is the purpose of a queue?
To help manage a shared workload among a group of people.
Very good. So a shared workload among a group of people. Something like a sales team managing leads, a support team managing cases. At its very most fundamental level, what a queue does is a queue allows ownership of records by a group of people. Okay. Raj, when is workflow triggered?
When evaluation criteria is met.
Yeah, but what first would initiate the evaluation of those criteria?
An update or a insert.
Very good. So anytime we're doing a database write or a save type operation, whether it be an insert or an update, to the database, that would then fire off our workflow rule for it to be evaluated. Very good. Give an example of cross-object formula that we created during this section. Leah.
I know on the candidate object is the full name, and we use the full name on the offer.
Okay.
So
yeah.
when we kind of traversed up from offer to job application to candidate.
Okay, very good. So we brought down that candidate name to display upon one of our child objects. Okay. Talon, where can what are the 3 ways to make a field required?
Validation rules.
Very good, validation rules.
Second one. Field.
Some sort of checkbox, I think. So, validation rule. Can anyone think of any other ways? So, Murat, I think you have some ideas.
Yeah, required checkbox.
Check the box on what?
On the field of the object for required.
Yeah, so on the field, we can make a field mandatory. So we can check that box. So that's our second way. And then what's the third way to make something required?
In a layout? Page layout?
In a page layout. So when a user is using a specific user interface, in other words, require them to enter a value there. Okay, very good. All right. Marat, where can users go to find more information on creating formula fields and validation rules?
Developerforce.com.
True, developer.force.com. There's another, so developer.force.com is one location. There's a different location though. It's one of our public websites, but it's not the developer.force.com. Does anyone know what I'm getting at?
Not the 100.
Yeah, so it's where you would find the 100, example formula fields and validation rules. Community, very good. So the Salesforce community. So if we jump out to salesforce.com, and then there is, let me see where I can find the community. Here we go. So CRM community. There's also the developer community. But the CRM community has a lot of best practices for things like, for instance, those formula fields and validation rules. There's also the developer community, which is to say developer.force.com, in which there's also some stuff. But in the case of formula fields and validation rules, those are specifically at the CRM community. Okay.
For more information on Salesforce.com training and certification, please visit www.salesforce.com/training.